of the Planning Commission for the City of Fairfield has now been called to order. Mr. Feinstein, may please have the roll call?
Yes. Commissioner Paul?
Here.
Commissioner Greavy?
Present.
Commissioner Werblin?
Present.
Commissioner Evans?
Here.
Commissioner Matthews?
Present.
Vice Chairperson Cruzen?
Present.
And Chairperson Childs.
Present. I'm going to now ask Ms. Wertman if she would lead us, Commissioner Wertman would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Information on providing public comments. Persons wishing to address the Planning Commission on subjects not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission, provided that no action may be taken on off-agenda items except as authorized by law. Off-agenda items from the public will be taken under consideration without discussion by the Commission and may be referred to staff. Comments will be accepted in person or via Zoom. Public comment instructions. To speak on an agenda item in person, please complete a speaker's card and give it to the secretary before the meeting or at the latest prior to the time for public comments on that item. When joining via Zoom, please use the raise your hand feature or press 9 on your phone to request to speak. You will be called on by name and will have 3 minutes to speak. Next, we'll have the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes.
Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I second.
It has been moved and seconded to approve the agenda as submitted. We will vote by roll call. Mr. Feinstein, will you conduct the roll call?
Yes. Commissioner Paul?
Yes.
Commissioner Greavy?
Approve.
Commissioner Werblin?
Approve.
Commissioner Evans?
Approved.
Commissioner Matthews?
Approve.
Vice Chairperson Cruzen?
Approved.
And Chairperson Childs.
Okay, next is the approval of the minutes for the January 11th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting. Are there any changes to the minutes?
Not from staff.
Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I motion to approve the minutes for January 11, 2023.
Is there a second?
I second.
It has been moved and seconded to approve the minutes as submitted. Mr. Feinstein, will you conduct the roll call?
Yes. Commissioner Paul?
Approved.
Commissioner Greavy?
Approve.
Commissioner Werblin?
Approve.
Commissioner Evans?
Yes.
Commissioner Matthews?
Approve.
Vice Chairperson Cruzen?
Approved.
And Chairperson Childs.
Approved. Now we're at the public comment section, and this is a time for the public to speak on items not on the agenda, but within the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission. I will now open the public comment period.
We have no speaker cards,
Okay,
and it does not look like we have anybody on Zoom.
okay. I will now close the public comment period. Okay. Moving on to scheduled matters. The next item on the agenda is scheduled matters. For each itemized item, there will be a presentation by city staff. For items that involve application requests, I will then ask the applicant to address the commission if they so desire. Then I will open the comment period via Zoom and in-house. I will close the comment period after all comments have been provided and after all our questions regarding the testimony during the comment period have been answered. After the comment period is closed, the commission will deliberate on the item and may have additional questions for staff. We cannot take additional testimony or questions from the public after the comment period is closed. So our first item will be item A, and it has to do with aviatrix.
Good evening, Commissioners. Those of you joining us this evening, my name is Maylee Sheehan, and I will be presenting item A tonight. The project is located on a partially developed 25.8-acre site off of Peabody Road. I'll go to the next one. Here on the contextual map, you can have a better idea of where we are located in the city. You have Claybank Road on the left side of your screen, Cement Hill Road running along the yellow line there. And then you have Peabody Road running vertical up the center of the screen. Here we are. And Airbase Parkway on the south end. Some key markers for you is the train station, the new train station that just opened, the Fairfield Vacaville train station, is at this corner of Peabody and Vanden. There is the new One Lake Park that's just recently constructed. Additionally, you have Vanden High School and Golden West Middle School. On the bottom of the screen, there's the Parker Road restaurants. And then, of course, just off screen, we have Travis Air Force Base. So before starting the presentation, I did want to just provide a slide of acronyms. I will be using a lot of acronyms this evening. I did this for you guys 2 weeks ago. Hopefully it was helpful. But so just a few on the screen there. TSSP, or the Train Station Specific Plan, PA for Planning Area, MPUD for Master Plan Unit Development, and EIR for Environmental Impact Report. So before jumping into the project details, I would like to give a brief summary of the train station specific plan project as a whole. I mentioned a lot of this information at the last Planning Commission meeting where the Commission approved the PA1 MPUD permit. But just to make sure we have a good foundation, I'll just do a very quick overview. So the train station specific plan is a master plan for approximately 3,000 acres in the northeast area of the city. The plan was approved by City Council in July of 2011. Concurrent with the adoption, the Council also certified an EIR that evaluated resource impacts for the entire project, such as traffic, wetlands, biological habitat features, and more. The specific plan provides a broad framework for the overall development of the area, including land uses, residential densities, and infrastructure, but it prefers precise land planning to each planning area within the plan. So there are 10 planning areas within the plan. Each planning area has a different designation. So we have residential, commercial, industrial, park, open space conservation, and of course existing development. Each planning area per the TSSP is required to obtain an MPUD, or that Master Plan Unit Development Permit. Currently, the plan area has approved MPUDs for planning areas 3, 4, and 5. And I just realized I forgot to include planning area 1, which 2 weeks ago you guys just adopted or approved. So here is that same contextual map we were just looking at with the specific plan overlaid on top of it. So again, we have planning area 1 with an MPUD, planning area 3, 4, and 5. 3, 4, and 5, and 1 are all residential planning areas. Planning area 2 is residential and commercial, primarily commercial. Planning area 7 is allocated for a new city park. It's a 50-acre park. Planning area 6 will be an industrial zone. Planning area 8 is designated for conservation and open space. And planning areas 9 and 10 are existing development currently. And then right here on this red triangle there is the new train station, which of course is what's spurring all of this new development. So as I just mentioned, and you are aware, Planning Area 1 was approved 2 weeks ago, and the project this evening is located within PA1. Our applicant, Republic Urban Properties, is the same group that facilitated the MPUD for PA1, and their project-specific site is starred on the screen within the MR and HR zoning designations, MR being medium residential and HR being high residential. The project site is zoned TSPD with an associated general plan designation of specific plan area, train station specific plan area 1. The project has 3 application components, the first being a tentative subdivision map. This will create 123 lots for residential buildings, private roads, amenities, and the pedestrian realm. I'll get a little deeper into all those components as we continue. The second component is the development review. This is essentially for the physical construction of the project, so that would include architecture for the proposed 346 townhomes. It's a total of 81 buildings, which does include an amenity building as well, and associated landscape and infrastructure throughout the site. And the last portion here is the environmental review. The train station specific plan has an EIR document that outlines several different mitigation measures that must be implemented. The MPUD for Planning Area 1 fine-tunes that specifically to PA1, and then this approval would fine-tune it specifically to the AVHX projects should you pass the resolution tonight. So starting with the tentative subdivision map, the project site is currently 2 legal parcels, and the application requests this map to create 123 lots. On each lot, there would be either a residential building, it could be a private road, an amenity, or the pedestrian realm. The pedestrian realm is essentially the perimeter of the project's sidewalk and landscaping. Per the specific plan, the pedestrian realm must be its own parcel, and that is to facilitate ownership and maintenance through an HOA or a property owners association. So this tentative subdivision map would create all the different lots so that every building has its own lot, every road, private road I should say, has its own lot, and the pedestrian realm also has its own lot. In addition to the individual lots for the private side of the project, the map would also establish Street A and Street D, which will be public roads to access the site. It also includes area for widening Peabody Road. And in addition, it includes some regional park features for Planning Area 1, which is the Wetland Pocket Park and the Linear Park Noonan Lane segment. So on the screen here, I have the map. And just to kind of identify exactly what we're looking at, because I know it's a lot, especially when it's kind of condensed like this. What I have highlighted in red here are just examples of the different lots. So this first square, for example, would be one residential building. So then you have 2, 3, 4, on and on and on for all the different residential buildings that are proposed. This little piece right here is just an example for how a private courtyard would be lotted as its own parcel. The larger parcel up at the top here is the proposed recreation building, so you can see the amenities themselves are also lotted. This longer stretch here is a private or internal street, so all the streets are also lotted. And then at the bottom here, this would be an example of that pedestrian realm. At the top and bottom of the screen, you have Street A and Street D, which would be created with this map. The blue square that just appeared would be the widening of Peabody Road. And then these 2 green parcels identified is the Linear Park Noonan Lane segment and the Wetland Pocket Park. So some key conditions to highlight when looking at this map. Staff has evaluated the map in terms of when things need to come on board for public works review. So at the time that a final map is submitted, should the commission approve this project, the next step would be for the applicant to process this map. And that process includes submitting final maps and legal descriptions, a whole slew of legal documents for review. So several of these conditions would be required at the time of that submittal. And then the last portion of that process would be recording the map, making all of these properties real, all 123 lots real. And so several of these conditions would be required at the time of that recordation. So just to quickly go over them, we are requiring that there is emergency vehicle access plan. So with the submittal of the map, the applicant must identify emergency vehicle access at all time of the project's construction and phasing. We are also requiring that there are public access and utility easements recorded across various areas of the project site, and this is to allow for the city to maintain different utility lines. Additionally, as I mentioned earlier, the specific plan requires that there is an HOA or a property owners association recorded for the entire planning area 1. That was part of your MPUD packet 2 weeks ago. Republic Urban Properties and the Aviatrix project being the first project to come forth, they're then responsible for establishing this association. Additionally, the project as a whole would have to record a property maintenance agreement. This is something the city requires for all multifamily, commercial, and industrial projects. The property maintenance agreement ensures that the property is kept in a good condition. Additionally, for this project, we are requiring under that property maintenance agreement that there is a single leasing and management entity to oversee the project and how the individual buildings and units are leased. And with that entity, we are requiring that they provide our city a management plan. So again, just to understand how the project site will operate. Within that management plan, there is a condition that it is subject to our police department's crime-free multi-housing program. And then lastly here, we are going to require schematic design drawings for the Wetland Pocket Park and the Linear Park Noonan Lane segment at the proper time of phasing. So shifting over to the development review application portion of the project, there are several components to cover here. So I have a quick overview list of the items, each of which I'll go into greater detail as we continue. So first and foremost, we have access and utilities. Access will be off of Street A and Street D. There is obviously the architecture component of this project. There are 346 units being proposed in a variety of building types. Amenities, the project does come with several private amenities. Additionally, the applicant is seeking a common open space reduction. There are multiple site improvements necessary to facilitate the project, parking, landscaping, and stormwater. And then there are regional improvements that are tied to this project as well, including the Peabody Road widening and the 2 park components, the Wetland Pocket Park and the Linear Park. And then lastly, the applicant is proposing to phase the development of this project in 2 phases, so we'll cover that as well. So coming back to the new roads, I should say, to be constructed for access. I just wanted to highlight here on the preliminary site plan, again, you have Street A and Street D. And then I also just wanted to kind of quickly key the 5 different amenity areas. That's what's appearing in the green stars. The red lines here represent where there is on-site parking. And this one's a little hard to see, but those little blue triangles are locations for stormwater treatment areas. And again, we'll get deeper and deeper as I continue forward. So looking at the access, this is a cross-section of Street A. I just wanted to show you what Street A would look like at build-out. So there will be 4 feet of landscaping, a 6-foot sidewalk, another 8-foot parkway or another landscape strip. You have street parking, and then you have travel lanes, 1 lane in each direction, and then it closes out mirroring the other side of the street. For Street D, very similar, your landscape and your parkway strip. However, you will notice that there is a 10-foot multi-use trail rather than the 6-foot sidewalk. This 10-foot multi-use trail is part of the train station specific plan. It's part of a greater circulation network. So if you're in planning area 1, you could take this 10-foot multi-use trail and travel all the way through planning areas 2, 3, 4, etc. Ultimately, it could lead you to the lake park that is currently under construction, and at full build out to the Great Park in Planning Area 7, or the Matt Garcia Community Park as it's been recently named. And of course, it can bring you to the train station. I do want to note that there are 2 different cross sections here for Street D. You have essentially what is the regular Street D cross section at the top, It's the larger 82-foot width. And then we have a smaller section that is adjacent to some wetlands. So the project site does have wetlands on it. And in order to avoid those wetlands, the street actually gets a little bit small, or the street doesn't, but the cross section gets a little bit smaller and it waves around that wetland spot. So what you'll see here is that the landscape that's 4 feet on the regular section drops off, and it also gets a little bit smaller on the other side as well to accommodate the avoidance of the wetlands. This is the utility plan for the project. Utility plans can be very overwhelming to look at, especially if you're not an engineer like myself. I pick on my coworkers to help me read these. But I do just want to highlight the fact that, of course, the project will have various private utility lines that will connect into public lines in Street A, Street D, and ultimately Peabody Road. Because the screen is so hard to read, I just highlighted an example area, if you will, of some lines. So that's Street A at the top of your screen, with the blue line being water, yellow line being sewer, and green line being storm drain. And again, it's tight to see, but there's lines all throughout this project, and of course they're connecting into the public lines. This screen here shows the architecture site plan, so there's various versions of the site plan. This plan identifies that there are 346 units, and it gives the breakdown of the densities per the development area. If you recall, with the Planning Area 1 MPUD, this site has an MR, a medium density residential designation, and an HR, a high density residential designation. Within that MPUD permit, there is allowances for a density transfer. Ultimately, it allows this project to be developed at a 14.8 units per acre overall density. So what is proposed here in front of you is consistent with the MPUD permit that was approved 2 weeks ago. And then lastly, the different coloring that you see for the buildings here is just showing the variety of building types that are proposed for the project. On this slide, I've broken down the various building types. So you have 8 building types, A through H. Depending on your building type, you are either looking at an attached residential building of 4 units, 5 units, or 6 units. And again, depending on that building type, it's either a 2-story building or a 3-story building. The smallest unit is 1,311 square feet. And your largest unit is 2,122 square feet. It ranges from 2 bedrooms to 4 bedrooms with 2.5 bath to 3.5 bath. And then the last column here is identifying the number of each building that is lotted throughout the plan. So for architecture for you all tonight, because there are 8 building types, I didn't want to belabor the presentation showing you 8 building types. So what I did is I selected 3 examples. I selected the examples to show you 2 stories and 3 stories. I also selected the building types that are most lotted throughout the project. So these are the ones that you would see most. So starting with building B here, this is the most lotted 2-story building. Again, I know it's a little small on your screen, but you have 2 car garages for each unit. Of course, you have your kitchen and living room space, and then upstairs are your bedrooms and bathrooms. There are 2 elevation styles for every building type. So this is the first elevation style of contextual agrarian. That is your front-facing elevation. And then at the top of the screen, this is the rear for that same building, and your left and right sides. This is the second architectural style. So same exact floor plan, same building, but with a different architectural style for the transitional Californian. This is building D. This is the most lotted 3-story and the most lotted overall within the project site. So it's 4 units attached, first floor, garage, den, and of course your entry. Looking into the second floor, this is your kitchen, dining, and living. And then your third floor with the bedrooms, bathrooms as well. Here is Building D in the contextual agrarian style. Rear and side elevations. And Building D again in the other architectural style. Lastly for you, I have Building H. This is not necessarily the most lauded plan, however, it's the largest plan. So this is the 6 units attached. So I did just want to show you the largest building in terms of massing. So first floor again, garage, den, entry, and bath there. You come to your second floor, kitchen, dining, living. Third floor with your bedrooms. Front elevation in the contextual agrarian architectural style. Rear and side elevations. And the building once more in the transitional California style. And you'll see that all these buildings do employ a variety of roof lines, architectural movement, construction materials. If I were to flip between transitional Californian, you'll see color schemes and materials are changing. Between the two, again, the pitches are changing, the roof lines are changing. So it gives a good complementary architectural style, but still provides variety within the overall project. Oh, sorry, excuse me. In addition to the residential buildings, there is a recreational building proposed on the project site. This is the floor plan for that rec building. So you would have your lobby, your fitness center, and a club room with outdoor courtyard. The recreational building is part of a larger amenity parcel, as we identified earlier. And I'll get into that deeper when we touch on the amenities. But you'll see here, this is the front elevation for the recreation building, matching the contextual agrarian architectural style. Similar materials, you'll notice that these building materials actually do transverse the entire elevation. So, for example, the stone here is not stopping at the base, it goes all the way up to the roof lines, and same with the wood paneling there. And then this is top of the screen, rear and side elevations. It's hard for me to squeeze these ones onto a slide. Sorry about that. So it gives us a kind of a good segue to touch into the amenity portions of the development review. So per city standards, every multifamily project over 150 units is required to provide 2 major amenities and 2 minor amenities. This project has provided more than that. So you can see they've provided a recreation building that would be considered a major amenity. The pool and spa would also be considered a major amenity. Pickleball courts, there are 2 playgrounds, dog park, community garden, and plaza space. Those ones would qualify for minor amenities. The dog park could tip into a major amenity based on scale. So they have definitely met the standards of providing the number of amenities required. In addition to amenities, the project is required to provide common open space. The train station specific plan has specific percentages for open space for the MR and HR densities. For MR, it's 16% of the net project area must be dedicated to common open space. And for the HR component, 25% must be dedicated to common and private, so the combination. What the project is providing is 11% of common area open space and 13% of common and private open space. So although the project is not meeting the requirements, the zoning ordinance does allow for the Planning Commission to reduce that requirement should you find that the project is of high quality and it is maximizing the use of amenity area, so consolidating into one large area and kind of over amenitizing that one area, and the addition of access to other off-site amenities. So as you recall, Planning Area 1 does have the Wetland Pocket Park, the Noonan Lane Linear Park segment. There's also Pocket Park A and B and other areas of Planning Area 1. And then there is the private recreation building for all the residents of Planning Area 1. So future residents of this aviatrix project would have access to all of their internal private amenities, their private building, and then they would also have access to the Planning Area 1 amenities as well as the larger regional parks. So due to that factor, the staff is recommending that the Planning Commission consider a reduction in the open space requirements to what is proposed, the 11% common and the 13% common and private. Here I have an illustrative site plan, or it comes out of the landscape plans. So I joke that the civil ones are hard to read. These ones are my favorite. They're colorful. You can tell where the buildings go, where the trees go. So I just wanted to give that overall. We'll dive into the different amenity areas, but here is your rec building. You have a playground here, the community garden. This is the Wetland Pocket Park. This is plaza seating space, and then the dog park up here. And there is a second playground and the pickleball court tied to the side of the community rec building and pool and spa area. And then lastly, the linear park Noonan Lane segment. So coming in a little tighter here, we have the recreation building, pool and spa, playground and pickleball. So this would be your bulk amenity, if you will, within this project. This is the secondary playground area. Shifting to the plaza, so this particular amenity area is actually adjacent to the linear park Noonan Lane segment, so it feels as if it's an extension of that park. Here we have the community garden. You can see some of the site furnishing includes gazebos and park benches and different picnic areas as well. And concluding the amenities and looking at site improvements, as I mentioned earlier, we've got parking, landscape, and stormwater to consider. When it comes to parking, the city standards require a total of 742 parking spaces. That's 2 spaces per unit and 1 space per every 7 units. And that 1 space per every 7 is to be dedicated for visitor spacing. The project is providing 945 spaces. Every unit has that 2-car garage, so you get 692 spaces out of the garages. There's also 167 on-site parking stalls, and then there's 86 off-site or street parking along Street A. For landscaping, the plans include internal front yard and courtyard typicals. So roughly what the yard space would look like for the various different building types. There's also, of course, the landscaping for all the amenity areas, which we just kind of breezed through. And then landscaping along the streets, Street A, Street D, and Peabody. For stormwater, the project site has various on-site bioretention, stormwater quality features. All of those are to collect any runoff and then ultimately feed to the Planning Area 1 detention basin, which is off-site on a southern parcel from the project. So pulling back up the site plan here, I've got a few markers again, so a little hard to see, but those are your on-site parking in red. Very hard to see, but there's little yellow triangles that just appeared on the screen. Those are the different stormwater quality features. And then here we have typical A for front yard landscaping. So depending on the building type and the way that they're lotted, whether the resident is accessing the garage from a private courtyard or if they're accessing it from the private road, the landscaping varies. So this one is showing if you were to access off a private alley, and so your front yard landscaping is essentially facing away from that internal drive way, if you will. Here is a typical B. So this one's a little different. For this, you would access your garage off of the private street, and then you would have essentially an open space courtyard, if you will, and then of course landscaping on the edges. Typical C, kind of similar, just a different building type, so a different floor plan. But again, you've got that shared common open space in the middle, landscaping on your edges. And then lastly, typical D. This is where your, if you will, your front door is actually internal. You're facing your neighbors door to door, and you've got this nice landscaped plaza court that you share for pedestrian access. And your garage access is at the rear off of an alley. Still focusing on site improvements, this is a hydrozone plan, so this does a much better job than my little triangles to show you where all the stormwater quality treatment areas are. So those are highlighted in the dark green. And as I had mentioned before, the stormwater will ultimately feed to a large detention basin, which is off-site on a property to the south of the project. And with the Planning Area 1 MPUD, whoever develops first east of Noonan Lane must build this basin. So again, Aviatrix being the first project moving first, they're responsible for building the basin. There are proposals for phasing the basin. So what you see on screen here, kind of in the darker colors, this portion will serve the project site, whereas this larger blue footprint will serve the greater planning area as it builds out. So in addition to the on-site improvements, the project is conditioned to provide off-site improvements as well. Again, this is consistent with the specific plan and the MPUD. So just kind of quickly listing the off-site improvements required. The project is conditioned to widen Peabody Road. They only are conditioned to widen Peabody Road on the portion of their project frontage. At the moment, it is one lane on that west side of Peabody Road, and at full condition, it would be 3 lanes. They are also conditioned to install traffic signals at Street A and Street D where they meet Peabody Road. We're also requiring signal modifications and striping at Cement Hill Road / Vanden Road. Cement Hill Road turns into Vanden Road as it passes Peabody, so at that intersection, we are requiring signal modifications and striping for pedestrian movement to access the train station, which is my next bullet, temporary pedestrian improvements. Of course, the basin that we've been talking about, and the parks, the Wetland Pocket Park and the Linear Park Noonan Lane segment. This image I have on the screen here is actually tied to the MPUD permit. This identifies those regional improvements. So in the pink striping, the Peabody Road widening, traffic signals at Street A and Street D. You also have the basin, of course, the Noonan Lane segment. The Wetland Pocket Park is tucked in right here. And then there would be signal improvements and striping at this intersection of Cement Hill Road, Vanden, and Peabody. This is just coming in a little tighter to the Wetland Pocket Park. So obviously there are wetlands and you can't necessarily frolic through the wetlands. So instead, a kind of innovative way to allow wetlands to remain in place, not having to fill them, not having to go through the mass amount of permitting that the state would require, is to amenitize around the wetlands. So you fence off the wetlands, you leave it in its preserved state, and you amenitize around it. And you create more of a passive park feature rather than just having this swath of wetlands fenced off away from the project site. So what we have proposed here is a variety of different benches, picnic areas. There are some playground equipments proposed, exercise equipment, bocce ball courts, anything that's kind of the right sizing to round the perimeter of the wetland pocket park. Additionally, to nod to the wetlands, there will be some educational signage to describe to anybody who visits the park about the habitat and the species that exist within this area. This is an enhancement of where the linear park trail connects to the project site. So per the conditions of approval and the review that staff has done with the applicant team, the linear park conceptual phasing will come at a later date. So this detail here just kind of gives us a snippet of what would be included. I know the text is a little hard to read, but essentially you would have more benches, more exercise equipment, of course, the pathway, and landscaping along the way. And then coming to the last component of the development review is the phasing plan. So the applicant is proposing 2 phases to construct the project. Phase 1 would include 227 units. It's sort of this red lining right here, if you can see that. It would also include the construction of Street A, the traffic signal at Street A and Peabody. It would include a first phase of widening Peabody Road. It would include utility lines that run through Street D, as well as establishing an emergency vehicle access along Street D. A temporary pedestrian path that comes south of the project site and ultimately connects on Cement Hill Road to the signalized intersection here where there are conditioned signal modification and striping improvements. Phase 2 would complete the project and is a smaller phase. It's 119 units. It will complete Street D. It will complete the widening of Peabody Road, and it will also include the Noonan Lane segment and Wetland Pocket Park. This slide here is my attempt to summarize a lot of information and kind of highlight the key conditions per each section. So we started with access and utilities, identifying Street A and Street D as the new roads. There is a condition that there will be an EVA or emergency vehicle access at all times of construction and phasing of the project. For the architecture, there's a handful of train station specific plan architecture policies that can be implemented on this project. The conditions ultimately are requiring movement and ways to break up large massing and provide articulation. For the amenities, there is a condition that just highlights that the stormwater basin areas do not count towards open space, so that's not part of the open space calculations we discussed earlier, and this condition kind of just reaffirms that. For the site improvements, we talked a lot about vehicle parking, but I did also want to highlight that our code requires bicycle parking, so 30 bicycle storage spaces are required. It's 1 space per every 25 vehicle. For the regional improvements, there are conditions that essentially just echo the phasing plan that they have provided. The construction of the linear park to be built with phase 2 and then completed within 12 months, and the wetland pocket park to be built with phase 1, also completed within 12 months. And then lastly, for phasing, it's not necessarily just tied to phasing. These conditions are more overall, but the project, of course, must be consistent with the PA1 MPUD, and also speak to the common benefit and cost sharing analysis that's provided with that permit, and the minimum Northeast area fee improvements, which was the regional infrastructure plan that I had up on the screen earlier. The next few slides here are just project renderings. So now that you've got the whole detail of the project, I just wanted to share with you some renderings that the applicant had prepared. So this is looking in at the project internally. And then an overhead view. Obviously, this overhead view also shows the other parcels within the planning area developed, so this would, be a long-term vision, if you will. But the project site is the sunny side. And then the very last component of the project application before you today is the environmental review. So as previously mentioned, the specific plan has an EIR that was certified with it. Notable mitigations for this particular project is coordination with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the San Francisco Regional Water Quality Control Board, and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So although they are avoiding the wetland components, there are still different processes and permits that they must undertake with these regulatory agencies. For the Department of Fish and Wildlife, since the priority or the majority of the site is vacant, they will have to conduct pre-construction surveys for different special status species. And the last component to mention here is that there have been no additional impacts identified that weren't already identified in the EIR. And so with that, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission adopt Resolution 2023-02, granting approval of the tentative subdivision map and the development review. And of course, I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have.
Maylee, that was an outstanding presentation. Now is the time for questions for staff. Please hold your comments or deliberation on the item until after the public hearing is closed. Do any members of the commission have questions for staff?
I'll go ahead and start. That was wonderful. Thank you.
was.
I always love your visuals. They're very easy to understand. So I'm not sure if I missed it or not, but these developments do not have like a patio area or any type of backyard.
So in terms of backyard space, it is limited to some of those courtyards that we highlighted, but several of the units do have either balconies or patios. Let me just grab one of these here. Let me grab a clear one. All right. So it's probably a little small to see here, but let me get my pointer. There is private patio, if you will. This is labeled outdoor. It's a little tight. This is outdoor, this is outdoor. So each unit does have a small either patio or balcony, depending on the floor, in addition to kind of those common courtyard spaces.
Okay, and that's is that just some of the buildings? That's just like the buildings that are in a certain area, or most buildings are going to have a patio?
So every building will have the private patios that I'm highlighting here and or balconies, and then depending on the lotting, you would have the courtyard space.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Ms. Sheehan, once again, excellent presentation. Can you go to the slide where you have Phase 1 and Phase 2 and shows the off-site improvement? So am I correct in understanding the widening of Peabody would be in Phase 2?
So the widening of Peabody is actually in both phases. And I would defer to our civil engineer, Alvin Lay, to give a better description of how that works out.
And Alvin, would you also please address how you anticipate the striping of that area as it relates to both above it, east and west, north and south, based on the vertical?
Excuse me, sure thing, Commissioner Matthews. So I just want to say, good evening, planning commissioners and members of the public and those viewing online. My name is Alvin Lay, and I work for the City of Fairfield Public Works Department. I think the best way to kind of, start looking into your question, Commissioner Matthews, is actually to provide some context for a Republic-specific project and dive into the phasing that will, will be required as their project develops. Maylee, could I ask for your help on this, please? Can you move the slide over to the visual that shows the overall project as well as the Street A and Street D highlighted?
Sure.
Thank you.
Let's see. Make sure I know what you're asking for. This one?
This one works. Thank you.
Oops.
Thank you. So I know the question was regarding Peabody Road, and I assure you we'll get down to that discussion. But to kind of provide some context on what Republic, being the first development within the MPUD to construct, and provide some insight on what their requirements are for their project. So before phase 1 of Republic's project is allowed their first resident, their first certificate of occupancy, Republic is required as part of their project to fully construct Street A, which you can see on the top side of the screen here, which will connect to Huck Road as well as Peabody Road. Now, Street A, the roadway, the utilities, all of that needs to be fully constructed and operational before Republic is even allowed their first resident to live out here in phase 1. With Street A, the segment of Noonan Lane that exists today between Street A and Street D, that will be closed off to the public. So now residents within Gold Ridge no longer need to travel on Noonan Road to get to a major arterial, Peabody. They will have a fully improved Street A to travel from Gold Ridge to Peabody Road and then towards Interstate 80 or wherever it is they'd like to go. In addition, Street A will also be Republic's primary and only access to their phase 1. So Noonan Lane south of Street D will not be accessible to Republic's future residents, and it will not be accessible to the Gold Ridge residents either. All of that traffic will be quickly, facilitated towards Peabody, which is intended to carry that amount of traffic. So now that's just phase 1 of their improvement. In addition to Street A, Republic is also required to construct traffic signal improvements at Peabody Road and Street A, which will further help facilitate that vehicle movement and provide more, I don't know what the right word is, timed movements between vehicles traveling north and south on Peabody Road, as well as from Street A. Maylee, can you help me move to the last sheet on this slide? So while Maylee's looking for the exhibit showing the intended striping for Peabody Road, I do also want to amplify that in the MPUD, the requirement is that future residents within the planning area will have safe and adequate access from any development within Planning Area 1 to the train station. So not only will Republic is also required to construct those pedestrian pathways or improvements, including wayfinding signage that will guide those residents along either a temporary access road or pedestrian pathway, if you will, or if it's completed and improved along the Peabody Road sidewalk that is also included as part of the Peabody Road widening improvements. So getting back to your original question, Commissioner Matthews, about the Peabody Road widening improvements and the phasing, it's a little bit difficult to see on the top here, but the top image here kind of depicts what Peabody Road improvements are needed to support Republic's phase 1 of development. What you'll see here in gray is the additional pavement that Republic Road will construct to widen Peabody Road. You can also kind of see the little traffic signals pointed out here. To kind of speak towards the striping, when the Peabody Road improvements are widened, the southbound lane will be split into 2 travel lanes. One will be to provide the right turn access into Street A going southbound. It'll also be the lane that provides cars the ability to travel through that intersection as they travel south towards the train station. After this intersection, these lanes will continue, and the striping will keep the vehicles in their 2 travel lanes through this segment here. In addition, with the Street A phase 1 improvements, Republic is also required to provide a dedicated left turn pocket going northbound so that vehicles that go through can safely continue going through this intersection, while vehicles that want to enter Street A or enter a public site or Gold Ridge will have a protected left turn pocket to make that movement safely onto Street A. Now, these minimum Peabody Road widening improvements are required to support Republic's Phase 1 development. Prior to Phase 2, Republic will also need to work with city staff to discuss and design the widening improvements to fully widen the west side of Peabody Road, which will provide, the future potential to support the 3 lanes of traffic that are anticipated in the TSSP's EIR. But knowing that, Peabody Road is being widened in phases, Republic will also work with city staff to ensure that those sections of Peabody Road that are not currently needed for those 3 lanes is striped, so vehicles are not allowed to drive within those lanes, and they will stay within the lanes that are consistent from the existing segments of Peabody Road. So, sorry, just to kind of bring this down to layman's terms. So Peabody Road today is a single lane roadway that takes vehicles 1 lane towards the south and 1 lane towards the north. That 1 lane will continue, and striping will help facilitate, will help guide vehicles turning right onto Street D, but it'll also separate vehicles that are going through towards the train station into their own lane.
So just to clarify, going, whether it's north or south or east or west, you're still going to have 1 through lane each way.
That's
You'll
correct.
have the addition of right and left-hand pockets. Okay,
That's correct, yes.
okay. I feel much better about that kind of a layout relative to comments that I raised from the last meeting. So thank you for taking the time to walk us through that.
No problem.
I have a question regarding Noonan, because it was mentioned that Noonan is going to be closed, and I know that at our last meeting, it was brought up that we have businesses currently there, and that the businesses were going to be allowed to remain until, but if it's closed, will the public have access to those businesses?
Good question. Maylee's helping me pull up a Google Earth aerial, which will help provide visual. But the short answer is yes, the existing businesses that are currently on Noonan Lane will still have access to their businesses off of Noonan Lane. And as soon as we pull this aerial up here, I can provide a little more clarity on that. Okay, so just to provide some context for everyone, today Noonan Lane extends from Cement Hill Road through to the north and connects into Huck Road within the Gold Ridge development. When Street A is opened, this segment of Noonan Lane right here will be closed to the public. The businesses that are on Noonan Lane today will still be able to continue taking access off of Cement Hill Road on Noonan Lane. This segment here will remain open to the public, and these businesses here will be able to access from this remaining segment.
To address something that was said earlier, Alvin had mentioned that Noonan Lane would not be available to the residents of Aviatrix. It's not necessarily that they can't drive down Noonan Lane, but if they go down Noonan Lane, there'll be no way to actually get to their units. So the only way for them to get to their units during Phase 1 is to go off of Street A.
Okay. Okay, that answers it. Thank you. And then I do have one more question. Are any of these units going to be accessible for people with mobility issues? Because it's my understanding that a lot of them are going to have 3 floors. So I was just wondering if any of them are going to be accessible to people with mobility issues.
I'm playing a little dance up here. Yes, per the California Building Code, there are ADA requirements. I can't speak exactly to the full architecture of the buildings, but I know the applicant team is here, and I'm sure they could address that further.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, I have a number of questions, if I may, or comments. I'm in favor of the project, but reduced common areas, if we do that, isn't that going to impact either the width of the streets or areas that, how is, let's change that. If we reduce the common areas, how will that impact those people living there?
Sure. So I guess to the first portion of your comment, although I know you said you reassessed it, the reduced common areas would not impact the infrastructure. So it's not going to impact the widths of anything. However, in terms of impacting the residents, if they didn't meet, let's say, or let me start that one over. If they met our zoning ordinance, our train station specific plan regulations, they would probably have slightly larger balconies and slightly larger patio spaces. Additionally, they might have larger amenity areas like the pool, rec building, the community garden, et cetera. However, with this particular project, and what we have seen with a lot of multifamily projects, is with the common amenities, you don't necessarily need the square footage. You don't need the width of the space. You just need to make sure they're programmed properly. So if you have a rec building, that it does feature a kitchen or a clubhouse, something that you could rent out for parties. Or if you have playground areas that you are providing the proper age groups, 2 to 5 or 5 to 10. So it's not necessarily, let's say you had a very large lawn, maybe you're hitting the percentage, but then that lawn is not necessarily programmed in terms of operational or accessible amenities. So from the common open space area, we do believe that a lot of multifamily projects, reducing that percentage doesn't hinder the residents in terms of what they get to enjoy. From the private open space perspective, that's a bit subjective, I would say, to be completely honest, of how much private open space you might prefer versus being within a community that has several accessible common open space, not only on your project site, but also within Planning Area 1 and in the regional planning areas with the Lake Park and the future Matt Garcia Park as well.
Okay, so that helps segue into my next question, which talks about the community amenities. We've danced around it the last time. What's a realistic time frame? Are we going to have amenities for phase one in place when phase one is completed? Or is it going to be a year after the completion or a year from groundbreaking? When are those individuals going to be able to enjoy these promised amenities?
Sure. So for the project private amenities, they will have amenities with the phasing. So phase one, I know this is not the phasing plan, but if you can kind of imagine it, and I hope I don't get this wrong, phase one roughly runs along this line, comes over, captures the wetland pocket park, comes back around, and then it's all of these units. So you would get the recreational building with phase one, you would get the dog park, you would get the linear park extension plaza, if you will, the wetland pocket park as well, and the first playground and the pickleball courts. The amenities that you would not get in phase one is the second playground and the community garden. So those would come on with phase two.
Okay. Then we're having garages for a lot of these cars that are promised. Drive down the street, very few cars are parked inside of the garage. It's usually everybody's camping gear, etc. Are there CC&Rs that are going to require people to, or the HOA that's going to require people to have their automobiles in the garages? Or are they going to be parked in their very short driveways and in the street right in front of their house? How's that? Are we going to manage that, or are we going to leave it? Well, we've promised you 700 units, and it's available, but
Yeah.
you decided to put your camping gear there instead.
Sure, it's a great question. So with this particular product type, the driveways are not large enough to park your car in it. And per our conditions of approval, or the way staff has reviewed this, we are considering those garages as parking spaces. So they can't be anything but parking spaces. You can't fill it with all of your camp gear and not fit your car in there. The conditions of approval do require that there are CCNRs and that there is an HOA. So when those items are submitted to the city for review at the time of final map, we would be looking through those documents to ensure that there's language that requires those garages to stay garages. However, in terms of implementation or oversight, we would defer to the HOA to ensure that people are properly using their units.
Okay, one more. This is the pie in the sky, okay? It really is. We have a school on the other side of the road. We have the train station on the other side of the road. And it would be really swell if we had an overpass for people to walk over safely and eliminate a great deal of risk for kids and pedestrians. Just a comment.
Just to come, okay. I'll take in your pie.
You don't have to come back.
Thank you. Alvin might have something.
That was bad timing on my part. So I don't have any comments on the overpass that you brought up, Commissioner Grieve. I did want to touch base on your parking question and your parking concerns. I do also want to amplify that as a condition of development for this project. These streets are not wide enough to support on-street parking within this development, and there is conditions of development that require the developer to, one, install signage along these streets that enforce no parking, in addition to whatever CCNRs or similar document they have to kind of remind the residents of that requirement.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up question then about the parking. Because then there's only one space per 7 units for visitors, correct? So is there a larger parking area for something like the clubhouse?
So there is parking along the frontage of the clubhouse. I know one of these slides has it. Sorry about this. 1 second. So if you can see excuse me, let me grab my pointer. If you can see this stretch here, this is a row of parking. So it's not necessarily a parking lot, if you will, but there is parking that is associated with the clubhouse.
Okay. And I'm assuming that however that parking was developed, it was in conjunction with the however many, I'm sorry, I'm losing it right now. So like it was in conjunction with however many, what the capacity is for that space. So say you want to rent the building, because my understanding is there's going to be a clubhouse also there with the pool, correct?
Correct.
So if you want to rent that space and the capacity is 30, but then there are only, so many parks, I'm hoping that it corresponds,
Sure. To be honest, I can't speak to if that parking calculation was related to the capacity of the building. As I understand it, the applicant has provided our minimum parking and then plus some, probably per their own internal understanding of what is required for multifamily. I'm sure that they could add a little more information to that. The only thing that I can add is that there would be the additional off-street parking or off-site parking on Street A. So let's say you do have a birthday party or you have something, they pull into your project site and all these spaces are taking up. Hopefully there would be parking on Street A for them.
Okay, thank you.
So I do have a question on the traffic lights starting from Cement Hill, Peabody Road, crossing towards north, going to Vacaville. We're going to have one traffic lights at the crossing of Peabody and Cement Hill Road. And the very next traffic light is going to be Street D, and after that it's going to be Street A. And if we go further down, like in the last hearing, you guys said those mini stores are going to stay there. So what's going to be the access for the mini storage from the Peabody Road? Is there any going to be stop, or how the people from going from south to north and they're gonna go to that mini storage, which comes on the left-hand side of the Peabody Road.
Gotcha. So to kind of, just to make sure I'm understanding your question correctly, your question is, there are traffic signals.
Let me complete. That's one thing. After that, there comes another traffic lights. That's Uber Road. After that comes Joseph Grievous. After that comes Chuck Hammond. Within a space of 1 mile, we have 6 or 7 stoplights already. So, is there any limit on the distance from one light to the other light? So people don't have to stop. Either we can make just a stop, or so it's going to be 2 main traffic lights within a space of 1 mile on the Peabody Road.
Gotcha. Okay. So to answer that question about the spacing between the traffic signals that are anticipated along Peabody Road, we have our city traffic engineer, Carlin Wong.
Too many lights in space of 1 mile.
Planning Commissioners, my name is Garland Wong. I'm the city's traffic engineer. So the spacing of the traffic signals were determined through the environmental impact report that was done for the entire specific plan, and those were preset spacing locations. So ideally, you want spacing anywhere between 700 feet and 1,200 feet for traffic signals. So we intend to coordinate the signals as they come online. And so what our best case scenario is that we'll tie the signals in a coordination mode so they can synchronize through those lights as they progress through either northbound or southbound. Does that answer the question?
Okay. And then another question, more buildings and more houses, it's a burden on the electricity. Are we doing anything with the solar panels to be compulsory on all these new houses you're building there? So it's going to become inbuilt solar panels for these houses?
Sure. I'll kind of deflect that a little bit to the applicant as well. I do know that there was a recent energy code update that the state of California did. I'm just not well versed enough to say with 100% certainty that they will be included, but I do believe that energy code has requirements for solar, and I'm sure our applicant team can speak to that.
Thank you.
I had just one question. It's kind of personal because I'm a bike rider. During all this construction and movement, will I still be able to ride my bike up Peabody Road?
It's an excellent question, Commissioner Childs. So Peabody Road widening improvements do include a protected bike lane on both sides of Peabody Road. So with widening of the westerly side of Peabody Road, when that's completed, there will be a dedicated buffered bike lane. Your question specifically towards during construction, will you still be able to ride your bicycle down Peabody Road? Republic or the developer, just like anywhere else in the city, any developer elsewhere in the city, they are required to work with the city staff and our Public Works Department to ensure that there's adequate traffic control in place during construction to make sure that pedestrians, cyclists will have safe movements even during construction. To kind of expand on that point a little bit, when Street A is constructed and then subsequently Street D, in addition to the wayfinding signage requirements as well as the pedestrian pathway from that development to the train station, there will be a mode or like a pathway for you to safely follow those wayfinding signages, travel along that pedestrian trail to get to the train station on your bike.
All right, thank you. Any other commissioners?
Shoot, sorry.
I do have a question. You mentioned that there will be a single management or leasing office on one of the slides. Is that going to be on site? Will that be on site?
So our conditions don't necessarily require the management entity to be on site. Again, I'm sorry, I'd have to defer to the applicant team to tell you what their plan is for that particular entity. And I did just want to backtrack a tiny bit to Chairperson Child's comment. We did also include this in case there were questions. This is Peabody Road at full build out. And just to speak to what Alvin is saying, you will have this 10-foot wide multi-use trail, and that would be what carries pedestrians, cyclists, rollerbladers, whomever, down Peabody Road into the other planning areas in the train station.
Okay. Any other commissioners? Okay. So at this point, no other commissioners, no one online? Okay. I'm going to now open the public hearing. And I've got a couple of speaker cards here. Okay. I'm going to go with Jared first.
Hi, Commissioners. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Jared Newmeyer, and I'm the current President and CEO of the Fairfield Sassoon Chamber of Commerce. I'm speaking today to talk about the supporting of the Republic Urban Properties Avatrix development. First and foremost, Republic Urban Properties is a member of the Fairfield Sassoon Chamber of Commerce and is doing what they can to help support our local community at large. The development plan is expected, as we've learned today, to bring 346 townhome rentals to the Fairfield community that will bring amenities such as playgrounds, dog parks, walking trails, pool, clubhouse, solar, and other greenhouse stability features, just to name a few. During my conversations with their Director of Entitlements, Kelly, not only did he express excitement in this new build, but he shared how it would be bringing the city of Fairfield approximately $15 million in revenue, which would include the funds for widening a segment of Peabody Road, putting in new signals and pedestrian crossings, improvements that will allow easier access to the Capitol Corridor train station as well. What resonated with me the most during our conversation was actually that this builder is also focused on our military personnel. Avatrix appears to be aware of the huge housing shortage here at Travis Air Force Base. Being in such proximity to our north and main gates, it seems like this building project could really bring needed pressure release for some of the housing strain they are experiencing. As we know, Travis Air Force Base has a huge economic impact in our community, where many of the new airmen are having to live farther and farther away from our base. I'm hopeful that this development will help to make an impact of this issue and work towards keeping our airmen living and shopping local. Thank you for your time, Commissioners, for this evening, and we look forward to settling this with Avatrix. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jared. My second speaker will be Peter Lynn.
Hi, good evening, Commissioners. It's good to be here again. Nice to see you guys. My name is Peter Lin. I'm the Development Manager with Republic, the applicant. I'd like to start off by answering some of the questions that the Commissioners have posed regarding this project. So the first question is regarding the accessible units. I think Commissioner Evans, you had asked that question. So by state law, we're required to provide 10% accessible units on site. And typically what we do is we position these units on the side of the buildings, so that there's access to the side pathways into the garage. So those are where the units are located. So every building you can think of, there's 2 accessible units on both sides. I also want to say regarding the question on sustainable development, Commissioner Paul, our project is entirely all electric. It's very sustainable. Every single building will come with solar panels installed on the roof. And what that allows us to do is actually, we can provide our residents with discounted solar energy. So that's the sustainability aspect that we intend to fulfill. In addition, our garages will come with EV charging. We're thinking for the future, and we will also have EV charging on site as well. The other question regarding the parking, I think Commissioner Grieve, you had the question regarding parking. Our project is entirely for rent, right? So we intend to hire a professional management company that we actually have used before on many of our prior projects, and they've done a great job managing our projects. So we intend to manage the parking situation through our management company. So it will not be, people will not be parking randomly, but we'll make sure that people are parking in the garages, the trash is getting taken out, and the property is managed cleanly. So, and then also on the question regarding open space, Commissioner Evans, every unit comes with a private ground floor deck, in addition to upper floor patio, as well as the way we design the plan is that every unit is facing a paseo. You can think of it as a garden, where we'll have nice landscape amenities and places to sit. So that will be, imagine clusters of that everywhere within the community. This is on top of the amenities that the staff has mentioned. So we have an abundance of amenities. We're actually exceeding the city's requirement on major and minor amenities. We're also, by the way, building a 1.8 acre wetland park, right? That's going to be accessible to our residents, but to everybody in the city. It will be public. And lastly, I would say that 44% of our units in phase one, so 100 units in phase one, have a backyard actually. So those are the units, if you saw on the site plan, is to the west of our site. So all those units will have private backyards in addition to patios in the front and upper story balconies as well. And then lastly, I just want to say that Aviatrix as an entirely for rent project, we are we're helping make housing more accessible to working families who are unfortunately unable to pay for a new home, but still need the space to raise their families and have access to amenities. And by locating our project, conveniently locating next to the train station, we're promoting the idea of an alternative transportation method. And we're standing by our commitment to the community. I think staff mentioned a lot of the off-street improvements that we're doing. But on top of that, we're contributing over $15 million in impact fees that we're projecting in phase one. These are fees that will help improve the roads and other infrastructures within the area. And then the 1.8 acre public park that I mentioned to you guys earlier. We have presented our project in the last few months to a lot of the major local community groups, including Solano Economic Development Corporation, Solano Transportation Authority, and then the Sassoon Chamber of Commerce, who just spoke. Some of these organizations are not allowed to formally endorse us, but I would say that in talking to them, they have all been very supportive of our project. The last thing I want to say is that it has not been easy for us, Republic, to come into Planning Area 1 as the first developer in this area. Particularly in today's market environment, you can imagine most developers are sitting on the sidelines. We've taken on a lot of risk and committed millions of dollars just to get to where we are today. But I'm certain that our project will serve as a catalyst for future developments to come into Planning Area 1. So I just want to say thank you again, and I want to say thank you to staff for everything they've done to support our project so far. And I hope you will approve the project tonight. And if there's any other questions, my team and we have consultants on Zoom who are able to answer any other questions you have. Thank you.
Peter, thank you so much for answering those questions and also providing some clarifications for us. Do we have any speakers via Zoom?
We are showing that we have 2 hands raised. I don't know if they're raised for item A, the item we're discussing now, or item B, the housing element, but I'll ask our staff behind the scenes to invite each of these speakers to speak.
We have Joe Green. You have 3 minutes.
Yes, Joe? Is Joe still there?
Does not appear so.
Can we go to our second speaker?
So if we can move on to the next.
We have Maureen. You have 3 minutes.
I didn't catch the name of the second speaker.
Maureen.
Lorraine?
Yes.
Okay.
Looks like she's not here either, so.
Okay, and we had a third speaker, was it? If I understand correctly?
No, it looks like we just have those 2 hands raised. So With that, we have no further speakers.
Okay, so then I would ask, would staff like to respond to,
Go ahead.
okay. Would staff like to respond to any of the issues raised by the commenters?
No, I don't believe there are any topics that staff needs to address. Thank you.
I will now close the public hearing and turn it back to the commission for their deliberations. Any further discussion by the commission? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve item A, resolution PC 2023-02?
I'll make that motion to approve it.
Second?
Mr. Feinstein, will you conduct the roll call vote?
Yes, Commissioner Paul,
Approved.
Commissioner Greavy,
Approve.
Commissioner Werblin,
Approve?
Commissioner Evans,
Yes.
Commissioner Matthews,
Approve?
Vice Chairperson Cruzen,
Approve.
and Chairperson Childs.
Approved.
Okay, the motion passes.
Okay. Now we'll move on to our second item on the agenda, which is a review and adoption of the sixth cycle housing element update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I'm going to introduce this item. So the item before you now is a request by staff for the Planning Commission to make a recommendation to the City Council regarding adoption of the update to the city's housing element of our general plan. And we're very excited to bring this to you. It's been one solid year of work, and over a couple of years we've been doing some other work to get to the point where we are tonight to bring to you what we believe is a final housing element update document that can be adopted by the city and approved by the state. So this is at least the third time we've brought some aspect of this project to you. Last summer, we presented to you a study session on what's called the regional housing needs allocation. And as a part of the presentation tonight, we'll give you a little refresher on that. In September, we brought you a draft of the housing element. The housing element is the one section of our general plan that we actually have a schedule that we're required to update it on, and it's every 8 years. And so the state has an expiration date for our current housing element the end of this month. And at that point, we are moving into the next cycle, the next 8-year cycle. And so we need to be bringing a new housing element. And then when we're all done with both the Planning Commission and City Council, forwarding that to the state for their final review and certification, their thumbs up that it meets all of the state requirements. So in September, we brought you a draft of that document. We held a public hearing on that draft, took some comments from the Planning Commission. We have our consultant, Allison Moore, who's helping us with the housing element as well as the general plan. She's going to give you a presentation, a little background on the project, some refresher, and then an overview of what's happened since we last brought this item to you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Allison.
Good evening, commissioners.
I'm sorry, Mr. Feinstein, I need to take a 2-minute break. Is that possible for us to take or I'm sorry, I should address the chair. Chairperson Childs, can we have a 2-minute break before we continue with this session, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Steve, someone was watching online on YouTube, and they informed me that the two speakers were actually speaking.
be watching.
I'm going to call back into session the Planning Commission meeting.
And before we restart, it's come to our attention, there was a technical difficulty that prevented the speakers on the last item from speaking. I'm not 100% sure if they were actually trying to speak on the last item, but what we would like to do is to do a test to make sure that the folks who wish to speak can speak. And so I'll turn it over to our technical staff to run that.
Okay, you're gonna let Maureen talk.
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Hi, thank you very much.
Yeah, were you here to speak on the Aviatrix project or item B, the housing element?
It was on whatever the presentation that we just viewed was. The presentation as a whole.
Okay.
Okay, so I had two questions. My first question was, what kind of evacuation routes are built into this new development?
Ma'am, before we continue, if you could just hold for a moment.
Sure.
So the Brown Act provides that when there's technical difficulties that in a hybrid setting meeting, that the commission cannot take action, formal action, until we're able to resolve those technical difficulties. So my proposal at this stage would be to reopen that public hearing, to open the public comment period once again, and cast our votes once again, just to make sure that there's no potential Brown Act challenge for the resolution that you guys just approved. I think maybe before we do that, we should confirm with each of the other speakers that we have on Zoom whether they would like to speak on the item A or if their comments are actually for item B.
And we did have one other speaker, which was, I believe, Joseph Green Heffern. If you're there, can you just announce yourself?
This is Joe Green Heffern. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Were you here to speak on item A, the Aviatrix project, or item B, the housing element?
Yes, item A, but I will also comment on item B later.
Okay.
Regarding, should I go ahead on item A?
Let's formally reopen the meeting.
In a moment, we'll call you back up.
Okay.
I'm going to open the public comment section. So now we'll hear from you.
Okay.
Call Maureen.
Regarding item
I'm
A.
sorry. We're going to hear from Maureen first.
Maureen, okay.
Yes, Maureen, you can go ahead now.
Thank you. All right, making sure you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I really appreciate it. So I had two questions on the presentation that we just viewed. The first was, I'm interested to know what the evacuation route plan is for this new development in the kind of a situation where an immediate 5-minute evacuation of the entire development is necessary. And then my second question was, what kind of guarantees do we have that, there was mention of several items that are required to be finished prior to additional items happening, such as they have to finish certain aspects before the first tenant can move in. What kind of guarantees do we as the public have that those are not going to be changed, which we've seen happen multiple times with other developments, such as the Red Top Road development? The city has put in place, multiple requirements for that development right next to Red Top Road, and we've yet to actually see the expansion that was promised multiple times because it keeps getting pushed back. And I would like to know what the plan is regarding all of the promises for what's the guarantee that those aren't going to be changed again. Thank you.
Yes, Maureen, we're going to address those questions after all speakers have spoken.
Understood. Thank you.
And our second speaker is Joseph Green Heffern.
Yes, thank you. I'm a resident of Fairfield, but also the city's designated representative on the STA's Pedestrian Advisory Committee. And I want to emphasize the importance of the active transportation plan to improve pedestrian and bike access, particularly from Gold Ridge down to the train station. And I understand this development can't complete all of the Peabody improvements that would make that happen. But in the meantime, that what was briefly described, but not in great detail, of maintaining access from this New Republic development down to Cement Hill needs to provide not only pedestrian but bike access so people can get down where they can't access via Peabody Road. So I guess I'd like to hear that whether or not that is the case, whether this is pedestrian and bike access either down Noonan Road or due to this new trail that's going to be built, but getting from north to south down to the train station. Thank you.
I'm going to close the public comment. And I'm going to turn it back to staff to answer questions.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, my PowerPoint seems to be loading here. But to the first question, and I apologize because I did step away and return, I believe the question was regarding emergency exiting or evacuation, if you will, access. Is that correct? I'm looking, nodding. Okay, thank you. So as I had mentioned in the presentation, there are conditions that require EVA access at all times. So regardless of where the project is at during construction or during any of its phasings, either one or two, let's open here. So let's say we're talking about phase one. Sorry, grabbing my pointer. If we're talking phase one, which is essentially this phase here, roughly marked out, Street A will be under construction, but Street D must be built in an emergency vehicle access condition. So it won't be the full improvements that you would see of a city street, but it will be drivable. It will be drivable for construction or passenger vehicles, as well as emergency vehicles to come in and out of the site. So per our city standards and working with our fire department, there must always be 2 points of access, and there must always be an emergency vehicle access while it's under construction or being phased. So that has been taken into consideration with this project, and it is part of the conditions of approval. Speaking to the second speaker, I believe the comment was regarding pedestrian and bicycle circulation from the adjacent neighborhood off to the northeast, or northwest, excuse me. And I'll defer a little bit to Alvin to make sure I don't misspeak, but as I understand it, Noonan Lane will stay in place until Street A is fully constructed. So if anybody is currently using Noonan Lane as of today, they will continue to have that use until Street A is fully constructed, operational, and essentially opened. Once it is open, then that Noonan Lane segment that will become park will close, but you will have Street A in its place with full brand new curb gutter sidewalk and streets, travel lanes. So the Noonan Lane segment will actually be a much nicer condition than what is currently the Street A segment will be a much nicer condition than how Noonan Lane is currently existing. So there will always be connection points for pedestrian and bicycle movement and circulation.
And I'll add some information on the first speaker asked about guarantees that conditions will be met. So there are typically 2 control points that staff uses to ensure that the conditions that the Planning Commission adopts are met. One is the point where either a grading permit or a building permit is issued by the city, and some of the conditions, as we review their plans, have to be completed before the city issues a grading permit or a building permit. And so staff goes through a detailed checklist with your conditions to ensure that, the ones that are at the time of a grading permit or building permit, that those are completed. The other checkpoint is typically a certificate of occupancy. Some things have to be completed prior to allowing residents to move in. And so we hold on to that checklist, and the items that are more tied to a certificate of occupancy, we will make sure that certificate of occupancy is not issued until the conditions that the Planning Commission has adopted are met. Now, there was a reference to Red Top Road. That tied to a development agreement between the developer and the city, and there was a reference to some changes that have meant that certain things have not been implemented. The changes to those requirements actually came as a result of a public hearing in front of the city council. So there was another opportunity for folks to review that and speak about that. So where we do have those significant changes, they typically come back. So if there's a major change to the project, that would affect the conditions, then it would have to come back. Long way of answering that first speaker's question on that topic. And I think we've answered all the questions. So a little unusual here with the technical difficulties, but we'll turn it back to the chair.
So it looks like we need to make a motion to approve item A, Resolution PC 2023-02.
I will make that motion a second time.
Do I have a second?
I will second the second time.
Mr. Feinstein, will you conduct the roll call vote?
Yes. Commissioner Paul?
Approved.
Commissioner Greavy?
Approved.
Commissioner Werblin?
Approved.
Commissioner Evans?
Yes.
Commissioner Matthews?
Approve.
Vice Chairperson Cruzen?
Yes.
And Chairperson Childs?
Yes.
Motion passes again.
Okay, and now we'll go on to our item B.
I just want to thank everybody for bearing with our process police here, but I want to make sure the public was heard and thank the applicant team for being responsive, thank our backroom staff for resolving that issue very quickly, and for our planning and engineering staff for resolving all the questions that everyone had.
And now we'll go back to the review and adoption of the sixth cycle housing element update.
And I had invited Allison Moore, our consultant, to come up and lead the presentation for you tonight.
So we're going to have a little more of more.
Hello again. My name is Allison Moore. I am a planner with the consulting firm Diet and Bhatia. My colleague Rajiv Bhatia is on the Zoom for any other questions that might come up, and if you'll just give me a minute for the PowerPoint to load. Technical difficulties with this too, I guess.
Yeah, it will load. It does just take a few minutes for some larger presentations.
Oh, here we go. Hold close.
We're going to take another short 5-minute intermission.
You're good to bring us
Okay.
back to the podium.
We will now reconvene the Planning Commission meeting.
All right, third time's a charm. So as Dave mentioned, this meeting picks back up where we left off in September, but I will give a brief recap and some context on the housing element and Fairfield's housing needs, a description about public engagement, some more information on the consultation process that we had with the California Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, as well as a brief overview of the negative declaration prepared for the housing element, next steps, and our recommendation for action tonight. So the housing element update is part of Fairfield's comprehensive general plan update effort known as Fairfield Forward 2050. Efforts to develop the housing element have been happening in tandem with general plan outreach efforts. The housing element generally uses Fairfield's current land use categories and densities to inform housing site selection. However, as the remainder of the other elements are updated, there will be opportunities to explore housing, employment, shopping, infrastructure, parks, and other components of the city as the general plan update process continues. So the housing element itself is a required element. Its purpose is to provide opportunities for housing development for all economic segments of the community and remove constraints on housing supply and affordability over the time period of 2023 to 2031. The housing element is reviewed by and must be certified by HCD. One of the most fundamental components of the housing element is the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA. That is Fairfield's fair share of housing units that must be planned for at various income levels over the 8-year period known as the housing cycle. This is the 6th housing cycle. While the overall number of housing units has gone down slightly since the last housing cycle, the need for and proportion of lower income housing, including housing affordable to moderate, low, and very low incomes, has increased. Other parts of the housing element include a needs assessment in which the city must evaluate its existing supply and housing needs, particularly for special needs groups. That includes extremely low income households, farm workers, military personnel, and others. It must include a description of constraints in housing resources that act as barriers or opportunities for housing production. And then it must include the housing sites inventory and analysis that identifies where in Fairfield there are sites or parcels that can accommodate housing to meet the RHNA and also affirmatively further fair housing. And then there must be a list of housing strategies or programs that help Fairfield meet housing needs identified in the sections I just described. I'm going to skip ahead to affirmatively furthering fair housing. With this 6th cycle, HCD is looking for a robust analysis of how housing elements affirmatively further fair housing, a requirement of state law. And that means that Fairfield must show how site selection and programs further access to opportunity. And this means integrating housing that could be affordable to lower incomes in more moderately resourced areas, and using place-based strategies to improve quality of life and opportunity in lower resource areas. Low, moderate, and higher resourced areas are defined using criteria specified by the California Tax Credit Allocation Committee, or TCAC, and those maps are produced annually. And this map shown on screen here shows where those areas of moderate resource and low resource are. Oops. And then, as I described last time, having a housing element that is certified by HCD is very important. There are consequences if the city does not have an adopted housing element compliant with state law. The statutory deadline is January 31st, and our adoption hearing is on the 7th, so timely adoption should occur as soon as possible. An adopted element is required before sending to HCD for certification. And if certification does not occur within 120 days of January 31st, the city will have 1 year from that deadline to complete rezoning efforts rather than 3 years. A legally compliant housing element is also a necessary part of having a compliant general plan as well. So now moving on to community engagement, which is a requirement of the housing element. There has been a robust amount and various types including focus groups and workshops on housing. And generally, some of the biggest issues identified included addressing homelessness and adding more diverse housing types across the city. Infill housing downtown and along major streets were also concepts that were explored with Planning Commission and Council. And as the general plan continues on, there will be opportunities to address transformation along other areas like North Texas and the Solano Town Center Mall. There was also a 30-day public comment period for the housing element after the public draft release in October. And then state HCD requires a 7-day review period for any changes made to a draft, and all of those red line drafts are available on the Fairfield Forward website. And over the course of the housing element process, we received 20 letters from individuals and organizations, and our thematic responses to those comment letters are included in Chapter 2 of the housing element. Some of the main themes we heard were concerns about adding more housing in the Cordelia area and potential strain on infrastructure, also a theme that we've heard as part of general plan outreach, as well as a desire for more clarity on how the policies and actions in the housing element align with affirmatively furthering fair housing goals. As I mentioned before, Fairfield must show that it both equitably distributes and affirmatively furthers fair housing in areas of moderate opportunity. And as part of the general plan update, we will be addressing community concerns related to traffic, schools, and need for more commercial and services. To address this second theme, we added several tables in the action plan to demonstrate how the programs and actions match with those goals. And then members of the public also made suggestions for how to improve actions, and each of those were included in the following places in the blue bullets here. So our state HCD letter. So the planning team has been in close contact with HCD as they have reviewed our housing element, and we have been meeting informally with our reviewers to proactively address any areas where more information was needed to fulfill state requirements. And again, those are available in red line on the Fairfield Forward website. And in large part due to this close coordination, Fairfield received a relatively short formal letter of review from HCD on January 3rd, outlining just a few additional areas for revision. The team has completed these revisions, and we believe that the draft before you this evening meets all statutory requirements of state housing element law. So I'll just walk through quickly about how we addressed each of the components of the letter. The first was about the inventory of land. The team conducted further analysis of non-vacant sites in several tables in Appendix C and retained sites that had the greatest capacity for redevelopment, and removed any non-vacant sites that had constraints such as longer-term leases or others. Staff also addressed requirements for AB 725, that should be another bullet, showing that at least 25% of moderate and above moderate income sites in the inventory allow for 4 units per parcel. While the inventory is close to meeting its lower income RENA allocation with existing zoning, there are a few sites that need to be rezoned both to meet that lower income shortfall and to affirmatively further fair housing. Clear timelines are added for that rezoning effort that fits also with the timeline for comprehensive land use changes to be considered as part of the general plan update and land use element update. For governmental constraints, more information was requested on projects that were granted exceptions and any impacts on timing or project viability when those land use controls were considered cumulatively. We added in descriptions of projects with those, and a clarification that bulk standards do not generally present a constraint. Other information added included the review procedures and actions for projects, and other new information was added also about the increased unit threshold for Planning Commission review of multifamily projects in the heart of Fairfield area. And then finally, the team added an analysis of time between planning and building permits for a select number of projects to address HCD's note about that. And then finally, the third area of the letter was around affirmatively furthering fair housing. They requested geographic and numerical targeting for a number of actions. All of those were added. And in addition to that, action 10.2 was added to demonstrate how the Heart of Fairfield specific plan already includes a number of place-based strategies to address areas of greater need, as that does align with areas of lower income, housing burden, et cetera. Also, as part of that action 10.2, the team is also calling out environmental justice policies that will be added as part of the general plan update that will have the effect of improving quality of life. The team has developed a negative declaration for the housing element, which states that the project will not have a significant adverse effect on the environment, largely because the plan doesn't actually propose specific development projects. Any rezoning efforts that will occur in tandem or following the general plan update and full environmental impact report for the remainder of the elements will happen simultaneously as that process. And then the comment period for this negative declaration ends this Friday. More information on submitting comments for that can be found at fairfieldforward.com. So staff believes we have an element that addresses all statutory requirements thanks to this consultation with HCD. The housing element and negative declaration will be considered for adoption at the February 7th City Council meeting, and then after adoption will be submitted to HCD for their certification review. And tonight we are hoping to receive public input and get the Commission's recommendation to City Council for adoption of the housing element and forwarding of the element to the California Department of Housing and Community Development for certification. Thank you.
And before we turn it back over to the Commission, I'll add just one item. In the last couple of days, we've actually received 3 additional comment letters on essentially this final version of the housing element, along with the environmental review document. One of those letters, all three of those are at the dais here for you tonight. One of those was from the Sierra Club, which essentially concurred with the statements in the HCD letter that we received, that short letter. So essentially they were affirming that they concur with those comments. And as Allison mentioned, we believe we've addressed those. Another one of the comment letters expressed concern about any potential changes to require multifamily housing in the vicinity of Rockville Road and Sassoon Valley Road. That's outside the city, and there's nothing in this housing element that proposes any housing outside the city and in that general area. So we believe that that comment is not something that we need to make any changes for. The final comment letter was a comment letter on the environmental review, and expressed concern about the lack of various public services, shopping, those kinds of things. I'll note that the lack of services in and of itself is not an environmental impact. And as Allison mentioned, the items before you tonight do not propose any actual rezonings. Those are called for later when we adopt the general plan update. And the commenter suggests a mitigation measure to be put into the environmental review to put a moratorium on any further zoning actions for more housing in North Cordelia to allow us to address the needs for services. As far as we're concerned, though, we don't need to put any moratorium on rezoning coming out of this action before you tonight because it includes the direction that that zoning not happen until the general plan update. So essentially what the requester is asking for in regards to any zoning actions that are called for in this document here are already met. So there's nothing more we need to do. We're already saying, yes, we're going to wait to do that until the general plan update. And at that time, as a part of that document, we will look at the service needs and the EIR for the general plan update that will include any of these rezoning actions and any service provisions that will look at the environmental impacts of that. But this document doesn't actually include the zoning changes itself. It just lays out a program for that to happen in the future along with the general plan update. So with that, I will turn it back over to the chair to take us to the next part.
Allison, thank you so much for a great presentation and also for your great patience in bringing us back up to speed on this and re-reviewing some things that we talked about in our previous meeting. Reminder to the commission, now is the time for questions for staff. Please hold comments or deliberations until after the public hearing is closed. Do any members of the commission have questions for staff?
I just have one quick question about that last commenter's letter, because they were saying that that some of the impacts of the developments that were recently approved or approved within the last 10 years are not considered within this report. And is that accurate, or how does that fit in?
Yeah, so this report looks at the environmental impacts of development or actions that guarantee that you're going to get a certain amount of development. And as a part of that, particularly as a part of what's called the cumulative analysis, you do look at all the other developments. Typically, you're looking forward. What are developments that haven't occurred yet? You don't typically look backwards. If you're doing a traffic analysis, yeah, you're going to account for some of that traffic. But you don't typically look backwards at all the development that's happened. You're typically looking forward at future development that isn't accounted for yet. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I will say that we typically do the actual detailed CEQA analysis at the time the zoning changes are proposed and or when a development action is proposed. And all of, in the past, every time we've proposed a zoning action, as well as when we come with a development proposal for you, it comes with a very detailed CEQA analysis. So all of that past development had its own analysis. And so when we come back to you with the general plan update, particularly when we're looking at service needs, things like that, or traffic impacts, we will account for all the development that's occurred. And then we'll also be looking forward at all the development that's planned. So it's essentially, it's comprehensive, but really it's a time, when is the right time to do that? The time to do that is when you actually come before the Planning Commission with a proposal to actually rezone or to build something.
Any other commission deliberation?
Good evening, you have a question. Thank you for your presentation. Can you just go over again that negative declaration? I was just a little confused, and we're saying that we have this, there's no adverse effects because we have no essential applicants. We're not proposing anything. Would you mind clarifying that, please?
Yeah, essentially the changes that would ultimately occur coming out of this aren't yet officially proposed. They're laid out in concept, but they're not officially proposed. And what we're saying is when they are formally proposed along with the general plan update, that's when you're going to get more detailed analysis. And that's the time where we'll know all the other development that's anticipated, and you can really do a comprehensive look at what are all the service needs for the area, what are the environmental impacts of providing those services. So, so essentially right now, all it is laying out some programs, but those actions aren't being taken. And you do the detailed analysis at the time the actions are being taken. And the upshot of the request of that letter is that the rezonings be put off until the general plan is adopted, and that's exactly what this housing element proposes. The policies in there say don't do the rezoning until you're doing it concurrent with the general plan amendment, or the update, I should say.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other commissioners? Seeing none, I will now open the public hearing. Do I have any cards?
Yes, it looks like we have one card, and at the moment, we have one speaker with their hand raised.
Okay,
Can we let the Zoom speaker be first?
okay. And who's, can we have the Zoom speaker come in?
Yes, we have Joe Green again.
Yeah. Joe?
Yes, this is Joe Green Heffern, and I appreciate David Feinstein forwarding my comment letter to the commissioners and providing a brief summary. And I don't disagree with the statement that everything is fine if the rezoning only happens after there's a full plan for the North Cordelia area with the general plan update. The context for this is there have been many projects approved in the last 10 years, and there are new ones being contemplated, Green Valley 3 apartments, that are contemplating rezoning for high-density housing in this area, and never has the city addressed the service needs of the residents. So it is a cumulative issue, and while these developments have happened with all these apartments on Business Center Drive and elsewhere, the city has not had a plan for how to provide the parks, the grocery stores, and the other needs of those residents, and it causes traffic problems and many other issues. So I'm not asking for a change in the housing element. I just want to see a firm commitment by the city that that will be done before these 3 housing sites in Cordelia are taken off the table for other needs, such as a school or a grocery store or a park. There are no parks for all the apartments in the East Cordelia, North Cordelia area. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. And now we'll hear from Nora Dizan.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I want to say that the project that you heard earlier, the first item A, that's the kind of thing we need in Fairfield. And in the Plan Bay Area 2050, they identified the train-specific plan, me giving it the wrong name, but anyway, you know what I mean. That and the heart of Fairfield, plus the area near Beck where there's the transit station, those are the identified areas by Plan Bay Area 2050. There is nothing that they indicate for District 1. So I don't believe that there is a need to have those 3 lots or parcels supposedly for low and very low income. That's not the issue. Fairfield really does need that. But why are we not making it feasible, numbers-wise? You've got properties that the city owns, so the land can be a very cheap component. And then you actually eliminate permits or waive the fees for these other projects that I've been watching. So the cost basis will come down to a level where you can afford to have a project which will make it on low rents. That won't be true with those parcels off Susan Valley Road. And the person who said Rockville, they're just making a mistake. They meant Susan Valley Road. There are 3 parcels. The numbers just will not work. The city really needs low income and very low income housing. There's just no question about it. So why are we playing this game? It seems like there's this game where we're gonna suggest this, but hey, the numbers aren't going to work, so if there's anything built there, it's going to be more like Spanish-style apartments. It's a game. So can we please get serious? We really do need low-income and very low-income housing. Let's do it with what is possible to make that happen. Also, there is absolutely no reason to suggest that all the remaining Sino property in Cordelia be set up for housing, because that's what I saw. It was not displayed here, but when I looked through the documents, that is what I saw. So we really are not being treated properly. We've got a Red Top Road that is not yet widened, and you still want to throw this on us. No good. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Nora.
Could you check if Maureen is on the line?
We have no hands at the moment.
Okay.
So if there's any other hands, we would encourage you to raise them now. And there are no hands raised.
Would staff like to respond to any of the issues raised by the commenters?
Before I do that, we actually do have, I now do see a hand raised.
Okay. Can we have the person with the hand raised? They can come in now?
We have Maureen.
Yes, Maureen?
Hello, good evening again. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you again for allowing me to speak. I have to second Nora. I feel like there really have not been enough services and enough thought put into the Cordelia area. Each and every one of the parcels that has been open and available for building and developing in this area in the past dozen years has been filled with more and more homes. And they are getting closer and closer together to each other with, more and more of them are adjacent to the freeway, which is not exactly a happy place to live. And then you have even more homes and even more people without any services in this area. And the desire just seems to be to fill it in more and more with the housing that we all have to then commute together to outside of this area to try and find services or purchase goods for our families. So I just want to second what Nora was saying in that the focus is very skewed in what the Cordelia area needs. And we've expressed this time and time again in so many different meetings and seem to get walked over every single time. So I'm just expressing it again. Please give us some services before you fill any more space with housing. Thank you.
Maureen, thank you so much. Okay. So would staff like to respond to any of the issues raised by the commenters?
Yeah, just a few of those items. So to Mr. Green-Heffern, looking for some guarantees, I can tell you absolutely the issue of services and a comprehensive look at the impacts and needs for the North Cordelia area, Cordelia as a whole, and the city as a whole. Will be handled as a part of the general plan update. And that's the whole purpose of doing that, is to take that comprehensive look. So it's absolutely built in the fundamental purpose of doing that general plan update. So that will happen. And as mentioned, the rezonings that would be considered coming out of this housing element would be considered in conjunction with that larger complete analysis of needs as a part of the general plan update and all of the service needs that go along with it. There was some comments about Plan Bay Area 2050, just a little context for that. That is a regional planning effort by ABAG MTC. They are the larger regional governance entity that covers the whole of the Bay Area. And what they do is, among the many things that they do, is they provide funding for a lot of planning and infrastructure throughout the Bay Area. And as a part of that, they have identified areas that they want to focus on for spending money. And so they've identified what are called priority development areas. Ms. Dizon is absolutely correct. The train station specific plan out in the Northeast, where you heard the project today, that is an area that the regional government is looking to spend money on, as well as our Heart of Fairfield area. The entity, though, that oversees the housing element, it's the state. It's not the more regional government. And the state has their own laws and requirements. And as a part of that, they want, as we do planning, to look at the city as a whole. And they're not necessarily saying, well, yeah, our priority development areas are in a different part of the city. They're looking and making sure that we are providing opportunities for new housing in all parts of the city. And so as a part of the affirmatively furthering fair housing section that's required by the state for this, that's where that requirement to look at all parts of the city, including Cordelia, and including areas that on that map that Allison showed as moderate resource. Most of the city is that brown area, but we also need to be making sure that we're providing it in at least in the moderate resource areas per state law. And so that's why you're seeing some of it called out in the housing element in the more salmon colored areas here, including just, and really there's only a very few areas that are called out for some additional zoning. I'll also note that the housing element does not call those sites out for low-income housing as a part of section C4. It's actually for moderate income housing. So just some clarifications. So with that, I don't know, Allison, if there's anything else?
No, I would just add that we're talking about a total of 3 sites in Cordelia, and in the larger scheme of things, there are hundreds of sites included in the inventory, and most of those sites are already include zoning for housing. And just want to reiterate the point that we are trying to balance the state's mandate to affirmatively further fair housing in areas of moderate opportunity, while also improving quality of life in areas of lower economic opportunity. And so we attempted to try to balance that with this housing element, while also recognizing all of the issues that we have heard about need for services in Cordelia that we will absolutely be addressing in the remainder of the elements that we'll be picking up very soon.
Allison, thank you so much once again. We will now close the public hearing and turn it back to the commission for their deliberations. Seeing none, do I have a motion? I'm sorry.
I just wanted to make a comment that I appreciate hearing from Mr. Feinstein and Ms. Moore, I believe, about just that guarantee that we're going to look at services before we continue housing. I think that's really important, so I'm glad you publicly stated that. Thank you.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve item B?
Sorry, just one other question, Mr. Feinstein. There was an issue raised about city-owned land. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the recently approved, by recent, 6-8 months ago, next to Allen Witt was on city land. Is that not correct? And there are other developments that are not housing related, but the hotel and so forth. So to the extent that city-owned land is in the right area, the city is certainly open to working with developers for that.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, and you're absolutely correct that the Parkside Flats apartments, whether it was the city or the housing authority property, either way, it's just one configuration of our local government here. Yes, so the city does have certain properties. There's one particular that was called out in the housing element on Empire Street for additional development. We have other properties as well, but absolutely, the city, part of our mission is to look for how to develop, affordable housing, and if we have properties that are available, absolutely, that's to be considered. Yeah.
Any other further deliberation by the commissioners? Do I have a motion to approve item B, resolution PC 2023-03?
I make a motion that we approve resolution number PC 2023-03.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Mr. Feinstein, will you conduct the roll call vote?
Yes, Commissioner Paul?
Approved.
Commissioner Greavy?
Approve.
Commissioner Werblin?
Yes.
Commissioner Evans?
Yes.
Commissioner Matthews?
Approve.
Vice Chairperson Cruzen,
Yes.
and Chairperson Childs.
Approved. The motion passes based on the roll call vote. So now I'll turn it back into the hands of our director, Mr. Feinstein, for information and communications, and the director's report.
Yeah, several items to report on. The first is, I want to let you know that next weekend, next Friday afternoon, and then next Saturday morning, not this weekend, but the following weekend after this, our city council will be holding a retreat. I believe that's, is it the second, Friday the 2nd and Saturday the 3rd of February? If it's, let's take a look at the dates here. I want to make sure I'm communicating the dates correctly. Friday the 3rd and Saturday the 4th. So be starting on Friday in the 5 o'clock hour and then Saturday morning in the 8 a.m. hour. They'll be holding their annual retreat. Planning commissioners are invited to come and attend, listen to the items that are discussed. Big part of that is the city council will be discussing their goals for the upcoming year. What's most important to them, they'll be hearing from the public, things that are important to them. The commissioners, you're also welcome to identify things that are important to you. So I'll send you out the official invite by email in the next day or so with the exact times that those start, but it'll be in the 5 o'clock hour on Friday and then in the 8 a.m. hour on Saturday. So we would encourage you to attend if you're available. Second, I had mentioned at your last meeting the upcoming Planning Commissioners Academy. Just yesterday, they put out on their website the full details on that, so I'm going to be forwarding that out tomorrow morning to all of you and looking to see who's interested in attending. We have budget for at least 3. I'm going to see if I have money for more. We certainly look those commissioners who have not attended one of these. It would be on March 28th, I believe. Let me, I've got the, I have so many papers here, it got buried. March 29th, that's a Wednesday through the 31st. In Garden Grove, just outside of Anaheim. So I'll be polling you all to see who's interested when I send that email out tomorrow. And then finally, just some upcoming schedule items for you. I think I mentioned at your last meeting, and you all should have a copy of the environmental impact report for the Green Valley 3 apartment project. At your next meeting, you will be holding a public comment session, allowing members of the public to speak, identify whether or not that environmental impact report fully addresses the issues. If there's anything that's missing from that, we'll give you an opportunity. If there's anything that you think isn't addressed in there, there won't be any action taken at that meeting. We will hold that public comment period. It's possible people will speak, not necessarily on the EIR, but just be aware that you won't be taking any action. You're just listening to what those comments are. We'll be listening and taking note to make any changes to that document, and we'll be listening to you as well at that meeting. From there, we have a break before we expect that there will be new entitlement requests, permits that you're asked to look at. And so what we'll be doing is coming back to you in March. You've requested a couple of study sessions, one on height issues and related matters for buildings and whether or not our height limits are appropriate or whether or not they are a hindrance to successfully getting development here in the city. And then we'll also be looking at the question of, and this gets a little bit to what we were talking about tonight, grocery stores and what the market is for grocery stores. We'll get some good information for you, let you chew on that to get a feel for what does the grocery industry look at in terms of what's necessary for them to open a grocery store. So we'll get you some good information on that, and we'll take those items up with you in March. So with that, I'll conclude my comments. Turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. This meeting is officially adjourned.